When you really get down to it, anime openings are basically commercials. Their intended purpose, other than to present the credits for a show's production in an interesting way, is to sell you on the show right as it begins, that is, at the start of its airing slot when you're most likely to be surfing channels. What I do is as much analysis of marketing as it is a dissection of creative vision. So when the fine folks at Crunchyroll came to me and said, "Hey Jeff, we want to give you a big cartoon sack of money to analyze the Mob Psycho 100 trailer," I thought about it for a second and said, yeah, that's pretty much exactly in my wheelhouse. And also, when I open my wallet, a moth flies out along with a small puff of dust, so that sack of money would be real helpful. That's a comedic, at least I hope it's comedic, way of saying that this is a sponsored video, brought to you by Crunchyroll, but I'll save that spiel for the end of the video. For now, let's talk about Mob Psycho. Mob Psycho 100 is the brainchild of the enigmatic artist One, creator of the monolithic smash hit manga One Punch Man. One Punch Man is a phenomenon, so it makes sense that studios would be looking to One's other work in hopes of finding similar success. But Mob Psycho has a hurdle to get over that One Punch Man doesn't: the art style. One Punch Man was redrawn by Eyeshield 21 artist Yusuke Murata for publication in Shonen Jump, which means it looks really, really pretty. Before the first PV had even dropped, it was being trumpeted as one of the best looking anime of all time. One's original artwork is a little lighter on detail, and a lot, shall we say, rougher. You might even call it amateurish, but that's part of the charm. It jives well with his sense of humor and creates a nice juxtaposition with how sophisticated his stories can get. But it's not nearly as immediately appealing as Murata's hyper-detailed line work, shading, and background art. So above everything else, the first thing that Mob Psycho's PV has to do is address the elephant in the room and sell us on its art style. It has to convince us that it will animate well and be nice to look at for a full season. Fortunately, Studio Bones is on the case. Bones could have completely reconfigured One's art style to have more mass appeal, like Murata did, and it could have worked, but instead they tried to embrace what makes Mob Psycho's art unique, and turn its rough edges into a stylistic flourish, and I applaud them for that decision. The PV opens on a cityscape, sketched out in rough, uneven pen and watercolor. This isn't the sort of soft, pleasant background art that you see in the works of Ryosuke Nakamura. It has the rough quality of a speed paint, and so does the sign on the Spirits and Such consultation office, even if the buildings around it are rendered in cleaner CG. As this is happening, a narrator talks about the power of ESP. Next, we see that psychic power in action, and the animation is absolutely true to the style of the comics. It's rough, sure, but it's also incredibly smooth. It's very reminiscent of the style seen in Masaki Yuasa's work, which is weird since Mob Psycho was directed by Death Parade creator Yuzuru Tachikawa, whose work as an animator and director has almost always been very clean and polished. Regardless, he handles the style deftly, and those cuts immediately sell you on the show's visuals, particularly the money shot of Mob unleashing his full powers, shaking the very foundations of the city around him in the process. And the PV continues to sell it with a ton of inventively framed, impressively animated shots. Honestly, with these points of comparison, it's entirely possible that One's art style might fare better in the transition to animation than Murata's, which the One Punch Man animators had to take a lot of liberties with. This show could even end up being better looking in the end, especially with Bones at the helm. Although while we're talking about the credits, it's worth mentioning that the PV wouldn't be half as pulse-pounding as it is without the backing track by legendary Ghost in the Shell composer Kenji Kawai. He's given us a punk rock tinged OST to match the punk rock visuals. The soundtrack kicks up as the credits are displayed, overlaid on top of anatomical and astrological diagrams. These evoke thoughts of evolutionary advancement and changes on a cosmic scale, perhaps hinting at the future scope of the story, but also meant to be juxtaposed humorously against what follows. We get our first formal introduction to Mob, and the narrator shifts gears to talking about the doldrums of middle school life. Surprisingly mundane subject matter given what we've just seen. Interestingly, the first shot that we see of Mob is this off-kilter, highly detailed image of him standing ponderously by a riverside, bathed in twilight. Lighting seems to be the one big thing that Bones has added to make this art style sing, but that's not what makes this shot interesting. Typically, when we think of our teenage years, we perceive them in terms of beginnings, the morning of our lives, not the late evening. But this speech on what it means to be a teenager is framed with a sunset. This is the end of something, perhaps childhood. We see streetlights come on behind Mob, but the path ahead remains dark. If the lights do come on, the camera angle prevents us from seeing them. This may symbolize the relative clarity with which Mob can see his past compared to the uncertainty of his future. Look at the way this shot is framed. We can see the vanishing point on the horizon, everything that's come before is fully in view. But the way that the chain link fence crowds to the left of the shot and continues onward suggests that there's a long path ahead of Mob as well. As the narration suggests, this show places emphasis on the more confusing aspects of youth. The characters are then introduced one by one, along with the actors who play them. The narration characterizes all of them as displaying traits typical of teenagers, despite the atypical imagery. For all the power that Mob displays, we see him disheveled, lazily brushing his teeth in the morning. His older brother is much more clean-cut and seems to be offering some sort of friendly direction. The spoon, which the viewer subconsciously connects to the ones at the beginning, indicates he may be offering insight into ESP. Next, we see a few more dangerous characters, a rival psychic named Teruki who seems to be using the full force of his powers against Mob, and a group of thugs led by the tough-looking Onigawara Tenga. But then it's back to the mundane, as Masato Ichi snaps a photo and Kurata Tomei shouts about something. The shot of Mob's crush, Tsubomi, is a little bit less mundane, though this is just an effect used to emphasize Mob's tunnel vision when it comes to her. Not only is she highlighted in bright pink, but all of her friends have their heads replaced with vegetables. Mob neither knows nor cares who they are. He's definitely in some kind of dreamland when he looks at her. With the characters introduced, the PV takes off, first with a rapid burst of stressful images in time with the breakdown of the music. Mob abusing the show's weird, ugly little evil spirit mascot Dimple, various characters losing their cool, and finally Mob collapsing under the hot sun as he goes for a run. This is followed by an explosion of action shots from throughout the series. These don't really mean a lot out of context, although I have to commend the editing on some of them. The cut on action here is so tight that you need to see the previous PV to even guess that the rubble from this explosion isn't what's hitting Mob's barrier here. Rather, it's the attack that we saw Teruki use earlier. What's really important about these shots is their cumulative effect. The animation gets faster, the expressions more exaggerated, the character introductions get more bombastic, all while the narrator talks about overflowing emotions. This is all meant, of course, to parallel the quirk of Mob's psychic ability, that when his emotions reach their breaking point, he loses control and unleashes a vast torrent of energy. The 100 in Mob Psycho 100 is a reference to his emotions building up to 100% in this manner. And we finally learn who the narrator is, Mob's boss and mentor, Reigen Arataka, who appears to be using the line "and no one can stop it" as a threat in this scene. Everything builds up to an explosive crescendo as Mob prepares to unleash the full force of his power, but then things take kind of a surprising turn. Reigen assures him that he doesn't need to worry about all that crap, that he's the main character of his own life story, and instead of climaxing, the music dies down. This indicates that Reigen has a positive, calming influence on Mob, and the extreme low angle from which we see him indicates that while he may be unconventional, he is a role model for Mob to look up to. Not knowing much about the plot of the manga, I would guess that he will do a lot to help Mob gain confidence and control of his powers over the course of the series. And indeed, the next image that we see reflects that control. Hundreds of objects are shown circling in the night sky over the city, while the lights on buildings pulse along to the beat. As we pull down, we see that this is Mob's doing, but the action isn't frenetic or violent like what we've seen before. The motion of the objects is very smooth, and the cast is looking up in wonder, seemingly without concern. So what does this PV sell us, aside from the obvious high-octane action, I mean? Well, firstly, it demonstrates that the animation in this show is going to be gorgeous, and secondly, it tells us that behind the psychic action, we're going to experience a pretty unconventional story about growing up. Knowing one's sense of humor and his surprisingly deep insights into human nature, I'm 100% on board for that. If you're on board for that too, then you should know that this summer, Mob Psycho 100 is coming exclusively to Crunchyroll, where you can see hundreds of anime series, old and new, for just $6.95 a month, which is a heck of a great deal. And beyond Mob Psycho, Crunchyroll is the place to go if you want to watch a lot of my favorite shows, from modern hits like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure to classics like Cardcaptor Sakura, Golden Boy, and Yakitate Japan. After YouTube and Twitter, it's probably my most used site on the whole internet. I love using Crunchyroll, and if you're not using it yet, you should totally sign up for a 2-week free trial at crunchyroll.com/basement, which, in addition to giving you access to a ton of great anime, will also kick a bit of money my way. If you want to support the channel, this is a cool and effective way to do it. And hey, if you want to watch watch some more videos about other shows that are on Crunchyroll, I recommend checking out my 2-part analysis of JoJo's Bizarre Adventures OPs, which are some of the most badass opening theme songs out there. If you want to see even more of my stuff, be sure to hit that subscribe button for anime and gaming videos every week, and follow me on Twitter at G0FFThu for regular updates about everything I'm working on. Before I go, I want to give special thanks to my supporters on Patreon. I'm hoping you guys enjoyed this sponsored break from what I usually do, because you're the ones who make it possible for me to do what I do in the first place. This channel wouldn't be where it is without you. Thank you so much for your support. As always, this is Jeff Thu, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.